Hey there, I'm Jaron Jordan. Right now on Upfront, the battle over Wisconsin's Secretary of State, 7 weeks until Election Day. Is control of the state's elections on the ballot?
And I am not trying to have a hidden agenda. This isn't a power grab.
Matt Smith is on the campaign trail with Amy Loudenbeck just moments away. Then the Marquette Law School poll, the race is tightening and the focus of crime on the campaign trail. Charles Franklin is standing by with what voters think. And it is Hispanic Heritage Month, the history made this week in Wisconsin. Plus, we're discussing the critical importance of the Latino vote ahead of the midterms.
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront.
Hey there, thanks for being with us. I'm Jaron Jordan. 51 days to go, and Battleground Wisconsin is definitely living up to its name this weekend. A race right now is heating up for Secretary of State. Our editorial partner, WisPolitics.com, reporting longtime Democrat Doug LaFollette is seeing a big fundraising spike as the race draws increased national attention. This as he faces Republican challenger Amy Loudenbeck. Matt Smith now on the campaign trail.
Hi there, how are you doing? Good to see you both.
Amy Loudenbeck is at home in her home district. At Walworth County Fair, a familiar face at seemingly every turn.
Say hi, are you excited? Yes, good.
A Republican who won 60% of her assembly district in 2020, Loudenbeck knows name recognition will only go so far in her now statewide bid to defeat longtime Democratic Secretary of State Doug LaFollette.
You don't want people to just default to a name they recognize on the ballot. That cannot happen.
Is that your biggest challenge?
Yes.
Loudenbeck is giving up her assembly seat to run for an office that over the years lawmakers have stripped of any prominent power, eliminated staff, and moved the office to the bowels of the state capitol. Essentially all the power has been taken away, right, from the position. The office is literally in the basement of the Capitol. Why do you want to be Secretary of State?
I see an opportunity there. I really do. I think with a new person in that office and a new attitude towards looking at opportunities to utilize a constitutional office that's not going to go away, I think that there's an opportunity there to do something that we can't do unless there's someone new in that office.
You would like to restore some power to that office if you become Secretary of State. Do your Republicans in the legislature agree with that? Does Speaker Vos agree with that? Have you had those conversations?
Well, some of the conversations I've had with my colleagues, vast majority of them supporting me, are about the issues that they've had with their own constituents, things that the Secretary of State is supposed to be doing now but is not doing. Authenticating documents, filing the Convention of States legislation, holding up some constituent concerns that they have heard in their offices. So job one is to open the door to that office, be responsive to the people who are requesting services, and then talk about what kind of responsibilities they could put back into that office. I think everyone's really open to that conversation. Without getting into specifics, it just makes sense when you look at what secretaries of state do in other states.
In more than 24 other states, some elected, some appointed by the governor, the Secretary of State is the chief election official, the role gaining intense prominence in 2020. Former President Donald Trump pressured some secretaries to refuse to certify results in states he had lost. And now some voters in Wisconsin are looking to 2024.
Take the elections back into your office.
That's what you would like?
Oh, I think that would be, 33 states, the Secretary of State runs the elections. We need you to take it back.
Okay, you can do it.
Take it out of all of these bureaucrats' hands.
Let's talk about elections. How much power would you like the Secretary of State to have in overseeing the state's elections?
I've been really clear in my conversations that I like to focus on duties more than I like to focus on powers, because the job is ministerial in nature. So I can think of duties such as training or outreach or maintaining the voter rolls or any number of duties that other secretaries of states do in other states. Having unilateral power to be the chief decider is not something that I think the legislature has an appetite for, and I don't think the public would either.
Your opponent, Doug LaFollette, has said you're being purposely vague in how much power you would like over the elections, and has said that could be dangerous and that you're in this for a power grab to control the state's elections.
So I'm a policymaker now. When I run for election, I talk about policies that I would like to advance when I'm in office. The Secretary of State is not a policy-making office, and so I'm running on utilizing the office to a capacity that is vastly different than what he is comfortable with. If he is comfortable with the status quo, if he is comfortable having few duties and doing them poorly, then he can run on that. I'm running on something else. Being purposely managing expectations is important. I'm not going to tell someone, elect me and all these things are going to happen and I'm going to demand things, because there's no power there and there are no responsibilities there related to elections. But elect me and let me have conversations with my colleagues from across the state and be an advocate for sharing what other states do. I want to be really clear and manage expectations so that people realize that I am trying to open the door to an office to have conversations with people, and I am not trying to have a hidden agenda. This isn't a power grab. This is just about using a constitutional office for a duty that most other states recognize belongs there.
La Follette has served as Wisconsin's Secretary of State for more than 4 decades. In 2018, the 82-year-old won his most recent race with 52% of the vote, and says he's seeking another term to prevent Republicans from taking the office. He is staunchly against shifting any control of the state's elections to the Secretary of State. We profiled La Follette back in March.
Let's be quite honest. Our country is in crisis when it comes to elections. And if they are successful in 20-some states at electing Trump supporters to the office of Secretary of State, and they control the governors in those states and the legislature, they could easily change the result of the next presidential election. That is serious stuff.
Looking into 2024, a lot of people on all sides of the aisle, no matter what political party you are, look to the next presidential election and the next presidential cycle. Would there be a scenario where no matter what power you had as Secretary of State, you wouldn't certify the winner, or you would question the winner of the election?
So remember, local clerks validate results. They have a canvas. They go through all of the results and then they send them to their county clerks, and then they aggregate that information and then they send it up to the Election Commission. They do a reconciliation. They add up the numbers and whoever won is the winner. If there is no reason, no outstanding court cases or recounts, then you certify the election.
The race has seen no solid polling and has generally been a low-profile affair. Both see this race as different than in years past. The question is, to what extent?
Do you have any idea how close this race is going to be?
No. I know I'm running against someone who has been in office literally almost as long as I have been alive, and that has built-in name ID because of relatives that served before him. For me, I'm building my name ID. I'm out there. I am out meeting people where they're at. He's not.
As you heard there, Matt profiled Doug La Follette back in March. You can watch that full piece right now. We have it posted on WISN.com/upfront. Absentee ballots will start going out this week, and several developments we're tracking this weekend. Official guidance from the Wisconsin Elections Commission is being sent out right now to clerks across the state, alerting them that they can no longer fill in missing witness information on absentee ballot envelopes. That ruling is likely to be appealed and likely to end up before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Meanwhile, a federal judge has ruled disabled voters in Wisconsin can receive help returning their absentee ballots. One of the people who sued, Martha Chambers, talked with Matt this past week after what she calls a major legal victory.
Oh, it's extremely important. I mean, it gives us the right to vote. It puts a gold stamp on it that yes, this is official, and anyone who has a disability who chooses to vote absentee with the assistance of someone, you're good to go. You can vote.
How much uncertainty was there before the federal judge made the ruling?
It was more that there wasn't a clarification, and that was concerning. I'm not an attorney. I don't want to say it was confusing, but it was concerning as to what the message was. There is a federal law that allows people to vote no matter what the ruling would have been, that it's a federal law, so that Voting Rights Act of the ADA covers us. I wanted the message to be that everybody could vote, but they didn't know, meaning people with disabilities. So there's a lot of people out there that weren't sure if they should vote, didn't want to put their caregiver, their loved one at risk For me, I voted. I just went for it because I'm like, come on, I need to vote. And if somebody's going to question my vote, then I will tackle that if it would happen. But nobody's following me to the ballot box.
Right.
Still ahead, we have the new Marquette Law School poll, the results, and what voters think about crime 2 months from Election Day. Charles Franklin standing by next.